I'd like to take a moment to review some of the information presented in this week's Module 3 reading. As we begin to seek out sources for our research, it's a good idea to have a working set of questions on hand to determine the strength of the sources we come across. The suggestions in your course reading are an excellent starting point, and I'd like to share with you how I apply these standards to my own inquiries. Let's start with the currency of the information. This simply means that you've made an attempt to find the most up-to-date data published about your topic. This can be significant because, as we know, social science data changes over time, or can change rapidly if social norms, institutions, or cultural beliefs undergo a dramatic shift. So what does this mean if you're currently researching a topic that you know is impacted by COVID, for example? Let's say, like many of you are researching a topic related to health. Maybe it's depression or suicide, something like social media usage, or even homelessness. While you may be able to find current data, you also have the sense that this data is somehow shifting under the surface, or it just hasn't been reported yet. Here, the best approach is to simply report what you find, but acknowledge that there's likely to be an imminent change. This is totally fine to do so, and in fact, it's something published researchers do all the time, and are even required to do in many instances. Now let's talk about relevancy. Here, the main thing to consider is whether or not the information is not only generally relevant to your topic, but is important to either a main point or a supporting point you're trying to make in your paper. You may want to think about it this way. Is the information relevant not only to my question, but the way I've asked my question, such as within the context of a psychological, anthropological, or sociological framework? As far as accuracy is concerned, what you're really looking for here is whether or not the information meets industry standards, has been peer-reviewed or vetted somehow for accuracy. This can be such a tough one, especially with so much information floating out there on the internet that's either misleading or in some cases just patently false. One red flag is if you're finding a lot of credible information pointing one way, and then you come across an article that happens to be a bit of an outlier. While this can be really useful, I always like to take a moment to check sources and see if it's something new that's being introduced, or if it just doesn't live up to the standards I need it to. A quick word about authoritativeness. Here, I'm always looking for the author to demonstrate some type of depth of knowledge. Some simple questions here might be, has the author published more than one article on the topic or related topics? Does the author cite or acknowledge previous research? And finally, a note on the necessity of purpose and objectivity. Do we know why the author has published the data? Is there a specific knowledge they're adding to the body of research? We also want to know if they perhaps have their own personal bias. And one thing I try to avoid is using articles that seem excessively slanted in one direction only. While this can still be useful, one thing to know is that legitimate researchers are always required to disclose a bias or conflict of interest. So if you're reading something that seems heavily weighted in one narrow viewpoint, go back to our discussion on beliefs and values and ask yourself if the material is intended to share scientific knowledge or simply influence emotions. Thank you so much for taking the time to review this information with me, and good luck in your searches.